Hello, welcome everyone. Nice to see you. Those of you afar, thank you for joining us. It's a great pleasure. My name is Sakis Gekas. I'm the Helen Catus Foundation Chair of Modern Greek History here at York. It is a great pleasure to welcome Nikos Marantzidis, who is a political scientist, historian. If I may, he's also a prominent scholar and has written many opinion pieces and also has conducted opinion polls in the past and in the present. He continued work with the University of Macedonia and the Department of Balkan Studies. And it's a great Balkan Slavic and Oriental Studies. Thank you, and it's a great pleasure to have you here at York and in Toronto to talk to us about his latest book, among other things, which is called Under Stalin's Shadow. And most of you probably don't know, I certainly didn't, that in 1913, a young Joseph Stalin disembarked from the train from Krakow to Vienna carrying a forged passport under the name Stavros Papadopoulos, uh, which, just this information would probably be good enough to have at least one book or at least one talk by Nikos Marantzidis. It is a very timely book for many reasons that we'll come to later in the discussion. And I hope you will all get to read it and think about it. What we'll do is first Nikos will present his book, and then I will ask him a few questions just to start a discussion, and then we'll continue. So, Nico, thank you very much for being here, and looking forward to listening to your book. Nikos is the author of many books, I should say, among others, the history of the Democratic Army in Greece, a book on 23 questions on the Civil War and Philiapathy. It's called with Stathis Kalivas on the Greeks and Civil War in Greece. And one that is not my favorite so far. I mean, this is now my favorite, but my favorite in Greek, because I think, there's different audiences when people publish in English and in Greek. And the book in Greek that, so far my favorite is called Yasasin Milet, Long Live the Nation, if I can translate it accurately, which is about which is about the Turkish-speaking, mostly refugees in Greece in the 1920s and 30s, and in the 1940s. So Nikos is going to talk to us. Professor Marantzidis is going to talk to us about his latest book today, Under Stalin's Shadow: The Global History of Greek Communism.
Thank you very much, Saki. I'm really glad to be here. It's my first time in Toronto, of course, in the University of York. And I should thank you, Sakis, for this invitation here. It's great. It's a really great pleasure for me because when I'm not a historian, I'm a political scientist, but I'm an expert on communism. So every time I should meet historians and discuss with them not only on my book but generally on issues that related to communism, to communist history, European or Greek one. Um, I really find very fruitful this kind of opportunity because I have to think, having the eye as the point of view of an historian, which is many times really different from the this one of political science. So I started immediately. I should first say that I my presentation here is based on a written text. I feel um, more stable. I can say to present on a formal basis my presentation of my book, and of course, we can discuss next all kind of questions that are related to the presentation, to the book, and to issues that go beyond, of course, the book, but are linked with communism. So, when the Iron Curtain collapsed, the winds of change swept over not just the former communist states, but over the entire European communist movement, suffering from a decline that began well before 1989. Communist parties abandoned Marxist-Leninism and embraced either social democracy or a new left radicalism. One party, however, followed a different path. The Communist Party of Greece, known by its Greek acronym KUKUE, was not eager to denounce its longtime heroes. In February 1991, after passionate and traumatizing debates, the majority of the KUKUE members decided the old communists had been right and the reformers like Gorbachev wrong. The party denounced the anti-socialist treason of the revisionist Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev and his allies, and refused to do away with its communist name, symbols, and identity. Although the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, once the motherland of communism, was now moribund, its specter continued to haunt the KUKUE. As the peoples of Eastern Europe tore down statues of Lenin and Stalin, the Greek party revived its Stalinist past. What prompts such idiosyncratic devotion to the Bolshevik legacy? We could think of it as a domestic electoral strategy. The KUKUE bet on retaining the allegiance of an aging electorate suspicious of reform and full of nostalgia for a heroic revolutionary era. We could also note that the KUKUE was not just an ordinary party like all the others, but one purporting to provide a secular religion, communism, and thus debased in its own sense could only prove disastrous for the organization. But neither of those explanations addresses the core of this 1990s Stalinist revival in KUKUE. As my book shows, in order to understand the nature of Greek communism, we need to look to the party's history, a history steeped in the world of international communism that forged the KUKUE's culture and identity. As you can see from the beginning, I put a question as a political scientist, not a question as historian. I'm interested to see and to understand why KUKUE today has such a behavior in the political arena and why today KUKUE is remaining a Stalinist party, which is not the case of the majority of the ex-communist parties in Europe. And my hypothesis is that if we want to understand why this is happening, we need to study communist history, not only in Greece, but in a global perspective. Histories of all European communist parties cannot be easily categorized, placed neatly in boxes in which we tend to confine stories about the past. In writing histories of communist parties, we should resist traditional dichotomies between national and international historical perspectives, between the local and the global. From its birth, revolutionary socialism has disavowed narrowly nationalistic narratives and raised fundamental questions of internationalism, intertwining the national and the global spheres of thought and action, involving geographically distant communities in networks and revolutionary projects. The specific brand of socialism that had emerged in the 20th century with the birth of the first communist state, the Soviet Union, built on this tradition but gave it its own rendition. Since 1919, the Third Communist International, the so-called Comintern, united revolutionaries from across the world. Those revolutionaries organized themselves into national communist parties which in turn produced sociopolitical communities parallel to national societies that the French historian Annick Rizet had called contre-société. I will discuss next about this term because it produced a lot of debates inside the community of communist experts, of experts of communism. Those communities bore simultaneously values, visions, and social practices foresaw in a future society, and sets of norms, rules, networks of social capital, and selection mechanisms in line with actual needs and the national framework which encompassed them. In other words, those parties embraced a vision of the future that defied existing national frontiers, centering instead on transnational linkages between the workers of the world. As members of national communist parties, such individuals simultaneously belong to the Comintern structure defined by an international hierarchy with Moscow at its center. As a result, the Communist Party's past belongs simultaneously to the fields of local, national, transnational, international, and global history. The book represents the first systematic attempt to examine in detail Greek communism from a global history perspective. It traces the West's interactions with the communist parties in neighboring countries and with the Comintern, the Soviet Union, and the Bolsheviks in the years 1918 to 1956. Through its macro methodological approach and its global history perspective, the book represents more than the history of a national communist party. It offers a history of international communism from the perspective of its periphery in Southeastern Europe. The book is divided into two parts. The first part, covering the year 1918 to 1939, focuses on the role played by the Comintern and the Balkan Communist Federation in the KQS transformation from a minor socialist party to a significant domestic political force, and traces the party's early immersion into the international communist world. The second part, from 1939 to 1956, covers the turbulent and transformative time of the Second World War and the early years of the Cold War. It ends with the famous 20th Congress of the Soviet Communist Party, where Nikita Khrushchev denounced the crimes of Stalin. The KQE was born in a turbulent moment when the communist world had just begun taking shape. While it originated in 1918 as a typical socialist party, its name in the beginning was SEKE, Socialist Labour Party of Greece, Socialistικό Εργατικό Κόμμα Ελλάδας. The KQE in 1924 became became Communist Party, and later on one of the European Communist parties most loyal to Moscow. By the mid-20th century, the KQE had embraced the spirit of Soviet internationalism more ardently than any other party in Western Europe. While other communist parties embarked on their national roads towards socialism, the KQE maintained unusually strong relations with Moscow and with its Balkan sister parties. No other West European Communist Party experienced such an intimate contact with the USSR and with the People's Republics for so many years. Because of this unique distinction, the Communist Party of Greece should not be considered as a typical Western European Communist Party, but simultaneously a Western and an Eastern European organization. The KQE is a Western party by virtue of Greece's international orientation. Position, Greece is a Western country, but it is East European by its own history as a party. In fact, for almost 30 years, from 1947 to 1974, due to the Civil War and its defeat in 1949, The party's headquarters were in three different East European capitals. Initially in Belgrade, Yugoslavia, from 1946-47 to 1948, later on in Bucharest, Romania, from 1948 to 1968 for 20 years, and finally in Budapest, Hungary, from 1968 to 1974-75. The Kukuez leadership and dozens of thousands of its followers were living for decades in a vast area extending from Stettin in the Baltics to Tashkent in Uzbekistan, a refugee land, a vast refugee land, as Sirius Yanakakis, a veteran Greek communist and historian, has called this region, this area, experiencing life and politics under existing communist authorities. It was in those regions, geographically and politically very close to the Moscow center, that the Kukuez experienced the turbulent developments unfolding in the communist bloc. As a consequence, dramatic developments that shook the post-war European communist world, including Khrushchev's rise and fall, the Hungarian Revolution of 1956, the Prague Spring, and the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia in 1968, were felt by the Greek communists not merely as events of historical significance, which was the case for all the communist world all over the world, but as traumatic collective experiences because they were living in those countries, in those places, whose impact affected their own situation powerfully and directly. Judging by regular political standards, Kukuez's history is one of the most tragic European communism had ever experienced. For instance, only the Kukuez among European communists would probably claim the world's record in dramatic party leadership turnover. From its creation in 1918 until 1956, the 10 persons who had occupied the post of Secretary General were all forcibly deposed and expelled from the party. And the last two, Andronikos Haitas and Nikos Zachariadis, both suffered tragic deaths. Haitas was among the victims of the Stalinist purges in the 30s, as far as concerns Zachariadis, we discuss next. The highly irregular and violent fate of the Kukuez top leaders reflected the party's turbulent political life. Long before its military bid for power during the 40s, we discussed about it next, the Kukuez had been transformed from a party rooted in social democratic traditions into a disciplined Stalinist entity that became completely subservient to Moscow and its obedient organs. That's not to say that the Kukuez was merely a pawn in the power games of communist agencies. In reality, the international institutions, such as the Balkan Communist Federation, the Comintern, later the Cominform, were not merely external factors determining the Kukuez policies. Rather, those institutions, as well as the geopolitical interests of the Soviets, all shaped the Kukuez leadership, its character, its way of life, and its decision-making mechanism over the years. Unavoidably, this process was full of internal conflicts. The Greek communists were pulled apart by centrifugal domestic and international forces emerging from political development in Greece, in the Balkans, in the Soviet Union, and in the shifting dynamics of the international order. Between its birth in 1918 and the 1931 Comintern's intervention into its internal affairs, intervention which, among others, imposed Nikos Zachariadis in the Kukuez leadership, the Greek party underwent a series of internal crises related to its public profile, its policies and its model of management. While seemingly no more than petty quarrels, in reality all those conflicts concern the very nature of parties' Bolshevization, as the Comintern called then the process of homogenization and centralization imposed upon its member parties. In short, the crucial debates within the KGB pivoted around the question of whether loyalty to Moscow's version of socialism and to the Comintern should determine every aspect of the party's life, organization, and policies. The internal quarrels about the reformist or the revolutionary road, the classic division that was divided the socialist movement in the 19th century, the attitudes towards social democracy or the Comintern's intrusive role in the party's affairs were different components of this Bolshevization process. However, by far the most divisive issue within the party and its relation with the Bolsheviks and the sister parties in the Balkans proved to be the Macedonian question. In November 1923, the Balkan Communist Federation, in its sixth conference, decided that a united and autonomous Macedonia is the slogan now of the Macedonians on all corners of their fatherland, which is covered with ruins. The communist parties of the Balkans consider it their duty to intervene with the greatest energy in favor of national and cultural rights and of the independence of the oppressed peoples of Macedonia and Thrace. The Communist Party must fight for the political and cultural freedom of national minorities. It must proclaim the right of minorities to self-determination. This right to self-determination should even give the right to compact national minorities to separate from Greece. The Communist Party will do its best to carry out the resolutions adopted with regard to Macedonia and Thrace. The Greek Party adopted, not without hesitations and reactions, the decision 1 year later, in December 1924. The consequences of the Comintern's position on Macedonian independence were catastrophic for the Greek party's position in domestic politics and for its own internal coherence. The gravest threat came in 1929 with the enactment of security measures for the social status and the protection of civil liberties, Law 4229, known in Greece as Idion. The law punished with prison or exile those who advocated the violent overthrow of the regime or the cessation of any party of the country, an apparent reference, of course, to the Macedonian issue. It did not expressly ban the KGB, but it clearly targeted its activities and its members. Empowered by the Idionymo law, the authorities broke up strikes and the KGB's public meetings. In the following years, up to 200 communist cadres were imprisoned or exiled, and scores of public servants were fired. Increasingly controlled by and dependent on the Comintern's network and support, the KGB stood by this risky policy for a decade. In December 1935, almost 11 years later, the KGB's Congress introduced the slogan of complete equality for the minorities, replacing the slogan for a united and independent Macedonia. But in reality, the consequences of this policy were following KGB's life until the 70s. The Second World War dramatically changed the role of the communist parties in the Balkans, including Greece, especially in Yugoslavia, Greece, and Albania, due to their leading role in the resistance against the Axis forces. The communists became ambitious and significant protagonists of their respective post-war national political scenes, while the Yugoslav and Albanian leaders, Josip Tito and Enver Hoxha, succeeded in their dreams of establishing a heading communist regime in their countries. The Greeks failed to do so. This was not for lack of trying. Rather, Soviet policy in the Balkans, shaped by the consequences of Stalin's and Churchill's spheres of influence power politics, impeded the Kuku's bid for power and compelled the party to seek temporary compromise with its rivals. However, many in the party were unwilling to accept the post-war international order contemplated by the Western allies. Rejecting a British-supported centrist conservative regime, the Kukuel leaders stumbled into an armed uprising in Athens in December 1944, which was suppressed largely by the British troops. The communists defeat in this armed confrontation did not quell the ambition of the Greek communists. As the Allies' victory over Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan began morphing into an East-West Cold War, the Soviet Union shifted its view on the future of the Balkans, which, with the exception of Greece, were now ruled by Moscow-dominated regimes. Growing US-Soviet hostility, combined with the Kuku's and Tito's aggressive ambitions for the political future of the region, prompted Moscow to become more responsive to the Balkan comrades' demands for increasingly assertive policies in the region. In 1946, it was not Stalin who imposed his will upon the Greek party. On the contrary, despite initial Soviet reservations toward an armed conflict in Greece, it was the Greek Yugoslav Communist Party's common strategy, backed by the Bulgarian communist leader Georgy Dimitrov, which persuaded a reluctant Stalin to endorse a communist revolution in Greece. The Greek Civil War was the first and the only hot war of the Cold War on the European continent. For much of the rest of the war, this conflict was a harbinger of a new kind of localized war in which external factors actually played a decisive role, a phenomenon that would become known as a proxy war. The intervention of Western powers in the Greek conflict and the extensive assistance received by the Greek government, initially from Great Britain and later from the United States under the Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan, is widely known because of its official intergovernmental nature, the wide publicity it generated, as well as its magnitude. On the other hand, and in part because of the secrecy that surrounded and the resulting paucity of documents evidence the Eastern Bloc's involvement in the Greek crisis, has until recently remained a relatively unexplored issue. Yet, as this book has demonstrated, the fellow communists were deeply involved, backed by Stalin's famed green light, according to the term of historian John Yatridis, the Yugoslav and then gradually the Bulgarian, the Romanian, and the Albanian comrades organized a huge military aid operation. The Civil War happened the way it did because of this remarkably auspicious for the Kukue coalitions of international factors. However, in the new and unstable international context of the early Cold War, Zachariadis and his comrades chose to overestimate whatever they saw as a positive sign and to underestimate or ignore those factors suggesting that they would encounter obstacles and difficulties in their ambitious plans. In particular, they consider the existence of the Balkan People's Republics as a decisively positive condition for the success of the revolution, While they underestimated the determination and capacity of the United States to support the Greek governments in defeating the communist revolution. Given how tightly the Greek communists had been integrated in the international communist world, it would be naive to claim that a communist insurgency could erupt in Greece without the consent of their Soviet and Balkan comrades. But it would be equally naive to assume that such a fortuitous confluence of positive factors in the communist world would last forever. International support for the KKK was conditional. It depended on the fluctuation in internal geopolitics, especially in a region as modern as that of southeastern Europe and the eastern Mediterranean. In reality, international support was tied to the prospects of a KKK success and the resulting profits, material, geopolitical, ideological, political, the communists worldwide could expect to obtain. The Greek communists therefore had to prove they could win this war with their guns and bodies. In a proxy war, there are many countries happy to offer encouragement and even some support and share the spoils of victory, but none want to associate it too closely with a loser. The civil war and its catastrophic outcome for the KKK changed radically how Greek communists could engage in their country's domestic politics. Two parallel political centers emerged: the old KKK leadership in self-imposed exile in Bucharest and a remarkably resilient left-wing political party in Athens functioning under the umbrella of the EDA. EDA means Εννέα Δημοκρατική Αριστερά, United Democratic Left. EDA was created in 1951, has a remarkable story. We don't have time to deal with this phase of KKK's history, which is very, very interesting because it shows us very clearly, according to me at least, the two phases of the communist movement in Greece. Their separate and different yet vaguely complementary interest structures and ideological positions. I talk about KKK in Bucharest and EDA in Athens, generated significant friction for all Greeks devoted to the cause of communism. The old KKK leaders no longer commanded absolute authority over the movement. As such, authority was now fragmented not merely politically, but also geographically. The two dimensions were not independently one to the other. On the contrary, they are closely linked. Nevertheless, as long as the world of international communism itself had a clear center of authority, Moscow, the KKK leadership could stave off a full-fledged crisis and navigate the incompatible desires of their bifurcated members. However, the Stalinization process and the uncertainties it generated exacerbated the internal rift in the ranks of Greek communism. For the time being, the differences were mitigated when Zachariadis, who a Stalin favorite had imposed his will on party politics, was removed from power in 1956. One year later, he was expelled from the party in 1957, and soon after was sent in exile in Surgut, Siberia, where he committed suicide and died in August 1973. Zachariadis was a special kind of leader, born and raised in two different empires. He was born in the Ottoman empires, and he was raised in the Russian Empire, two empires outside the Greek borders. His knowledge of Greece and the Greeks was superficial, distorted, and dated. He was a product of a unique, lifelong commitment to Bolshevism, which nurtured his faith in strict discipline, self-confidence, and directed his activism toward loyal service to the Communist Center. He was bright, energetic, stubborn, arrogant, inflexible, and believed to have been, not without some justification, one of Stalin's favorite foreign comrades. There is, there is a story about a meeting of the two men. Stalin called Zachariadis the Lion of the Balkans. Zachariadis was very proud, of course, for this name by Stalin. He regarded himself as a loyal and valuable instrument of Bolshevism, Stalinism, and the Greek communist movements in undisputed leader. He was overawed by Soviet ingenuity, power, decisiveness, and organizational discipline, and endless dynamism. On the other hand, he lacked understanding of and appreciation for the strengths and capabilities of the West, and particularly of post-war America, to mobilize its vastly superior resources and industry and project an influence upon small states like Greece in order to block the further expansion of Soviet-controlled communism, then perceived as the West's mortal enemy. Once deprived of Stalin's backing, Zachariadis felt betrayed by his Greek comrades and abandoned by Stalin's successors who had their own agendas and favorites. Ironically, the little Stalin's end was brought about by the very tools he had so much faith in: blind obedience and loyalty rather than genuine consideration of policy, cynical exploitation of people's grievances rather than the real democratic input. Those tools were, of course, those of his Bolshevik hero, Stalin. Fundamentally, it was Zachariadis and the Kukuez communist internationalism that shaped both his meteoric rise and his tragic fall. As a component of this complex and unstable international communist world, the Kukuez faced a daunting and dangerous task. It has to simultaneously respect Moscow as the fountainhead and arbiter of international communism, promote the international cause, and defend the Soviet Union's strategic interests as defined by Moscow's top leaders, while at the same time developing a cohesive and respectable party capable of gaining power or at least competing effectively in the domestic political arena. Given the realities of pre-war and post-war Greece, those ambitions proved excessively demanding, if not contradictory and unrealistic. After the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, everywhere in global communism faced a fatal hit. The center, the reference point of the system, demised, and as had noted the sociologist Martin Lipset in 1964, without a global party with its center in Moscow, the communists would be like the Roman Catholic Church without a pope. From that point on, the communists left everywhere, entered into a protracted period of turmoil and self-doubt. Some parties, like the Italian PC, decided to abandon their communist identity. Some others, like the French PCF, Parti Communiste Français, tried to keep some distances from the past without totally throwing away the whole system. The Kukuez, on the contrary, remained loyal to its Marxist-Leninist identity and the communist past without showing any regrets. In February 1991, at the party's 13th Congress, the hardliners won a close but decisive victory. Out of the 111 members elected to the new Central Committee, 60 belonged to the hardline faction. The Central Committee proceeded to replace the reformist Secretary General Grigoris Farakos with a new leader, the hardliner Aleka Papariga, the first woman in the post of Secretary General in the KPU's history. Thus, the KPU remained the last Stalinist party in Europe. The Greek left, however, experienced another revival with the rise of Syriza, the coalition of the radical left, who profited from the political volatility caused by the 2008 financial crisis. But this is another story. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nico. It is certainly another story. I will first of all say a few things about what I really liked from reading the book, besides presentation, and a few things, not that I didn't like. I mean, I like everything, but I not so much that I didn't like, but things that it would be great if you had talked more about, or things I would have liked to read more about, or perhaps in the second book. So the first one that is really important, I think, is that this, among other things, it's not just a party history, it's a history of also because we are in Toronto and in places that are outside the Greek state and in many ways in the diaspora, and that's a loaded term. But I think it's important story because it talks about people in the party leadership above all, primarily, that are from the diaspora and come to Greece, and they are first communists and come to Greece. Whereas the standard story is about Greeks who become communists first and then they become members of the diaspora, such as those who leave after the Civil War, for instance. So, the large majority of them going to Tashkent in Uzbekistan and forming, therefore, an alternative diaspora, let's say. But primarily, they're there because they were communists, many of them at least, and then they leave because of the Civil War. The second, I think, very important part of the book is the Macedonia issue, as you highlighted in the talk, and I think it takes the readers in a very informative way and tagging the discussion to these crucial moments of the Macedonian issue that have also to do with the period of the 1940s. So perhaps I think it would be great if you've written it in other books, and the issue of Macedonian issue during the Civil War, for example. But for an English audience, I think this is also very decisive, as you know. So for an English audience, reading English, it would be great if there was more on the 1940s, let's say, and how the KPU, Communist Party, turns lives of people, especially in North and Northwest Greece, upside down forever. Pretty much in some cases, some people, or for those who don't know, they were never able to go back to Greece after leaving during the Civil War and staying, having to stay abroad, or even some of them coming here, as migrants in the 1950s and 1960s. So it is a tragic history of the leadership. So in a way, I'm asking you in some sense as a historian mostly, but how or what would it take to write a sort of social history of the Communist Party in the sense of the party members, as much as the history of the leadership, the history of the party as an institution. But I see, as you mentioned, this is mostly your history as a political scientist of the party. But I just wonder in general, what would it take to write the history of the members? Are there sources that give us this kind of information? And that's where I come to the other issue of the sources and archives. We talk about in the introduction of how much more accessible the history of the party and feasible the history of the party became after the collapse of the Soviet Union and the opening of those archives in those communist bloc countries. So I would ask you, let's say, what kind of challenges did you have in accessing um, sources in various languages above all? Uh, but also, my first question, in a sense, would be, what does the Communist Party think about your history of the Communist Party? Out of curiosity. And secondly, and final question, let's say, point is, what would a history of the Communist Party look like 1956, 90, 91, perhaps, if not all the way to the present? And whether a more global history, an equally global history, let's say, of that period would engage perhaps, I mean, vigilance, I'm asking, would engage perhaps, would show how the Communist Party of Greece engaged with the anti-colonial movements of around, of countries who were former colonies, or how do they establish connections with other communist parties outside Europe, so such as Cuba, for instance, and so on. So those are sort of initial points. I don't know if you want to respond first, and then we'll open the discussion to.
Okay. Okay, I try not to respond because you put how many questions?
Several.
Yeah, seven. I need at least half an hour for each. So I put some thoughts uh, which are related to your questions, of course, and we try to discuss next all this. First of all, mm, the question, the issue of the diasporas and the Communist Party. This is a huge issue and very well documented since the 70s. The Greek, the literature, Greek literature at the beginning, have in mind particularly Elephant's, his book Αγγελία της Αδύνατης Επανάστασης, how we translate it.
Gelia is a difficult word.
Was,
Yeah.
So, of the Αδύνατη Επανάσταση,
The Impossible Revolution.
Revolution, yeah.
The announcement
The announcement of
the Impossible Revolution.
So it's very important book. It's one of the book. It's a pioneering book because Elephants tried to use both a social history perspective of the book and political analysis perspective, and he insisted in this role of the Asia Minor refugees in the development, in the West development during the 20s and the 30s. Later on, Elias Nikolakopoulos, a Greek political scientist with very good knowledge of history, tried to correct it with this concept, and he proposed another explanation about the role of the refugees of Asia Minor in the link with the Kukué. This population was strongly a stronghold of the Liberal Party, not of the Communist Party, at the beginning of the 20s. Only refugees, Asia Minor refugees, who were settled in regions with an old trade union movement like Volos, like Drama, and the tobacco movement, tobacco workers movement in Greek Macedonia, older than, of course, the arrival of the refugees of Asia Minor. So this meeting between those refugees coming in the mid-20s and these old tobacco trade unionists or other kind of socialist activists like Salonika, the movement, the Jewish movement there, um, created a radicalization among the ranks of the refugees and uh, those this population played a role in the within the ranks of the Communist Party. In general, I give you information. There is a book which is, I think, Kostis Kampoulos finished almost writing a book, a social history of Kuwait, making his focusing on the role of the diasporas. So, yes, this is a perspective, a methodological perspective. I'm a political scientist. I adore the structures, uh, the great personalities, the role of institutions like Communism. Uh, I studied in France common studies, so I'm very, very passionate with these structures like Comintern, Balkan Communist Federation, etc., etc. But if you choose to change your perspective and see things from the point of view of social history, focusing on the role of human beings, social origins, ethnic origins, you could write another history. And we talk a lot with Kostis Karpoudou, a good friend. And when I read his manuscript, I said, it's very funny because I read my book, but within in a very different perspective. I mean, from a different perspective, because he writes the same story, the story of the Kuwait during the interwar period and after, but having as a protagonist of his history not the international communist institutions, so the role of personalities like Stalin, Tito, etc., Zachariadis, but he is insisting more in what we call social origins of the Kuwait membership, which will be very important, of course, and very interesting. It's another perspective. I mean, another question is about the sources. The sources. I was lucky. I was very lucky because when I started my research 20 years ago, um, very few things existed 25 years ago. Um, uh, from the point of view of the international resources archives in Eastern Europe and Moscow, uh, just opened this moment, just after 2000, I can say it was the moment that the access to these documents was quite easy. But in the beginning, it was difficult. And I remember when I wrote this story in the book. I was in Paris in a conference about communism, of course, and a Polish historian came to me saying, I have a document for you. What kind of document? I asked. It's a document that the, the first communist president of Poland, Biel, sent to Stalin. It's a report, it's a financial report about what exactly Poland did and how much money is spent concerning the Greek Civil War. I said it was the first time in my life hearing the role of Poland. Never in Greece would have thought about Poland in the Greek Civil War. He sent me 2 weeks later the document in Thessaloniki from Warsaw, and it's 7, 8 pages. It's logistics. It's 10 ships with, I don't remember the number of tons of arms, foods, clothes, etc., etc. The role of Poland in the coordination of all um, uh, this aid to the Greek comrades, the cost of the military hospital for the Andartes, the the Democratic Army in Poland, in the Baltic, near Stettin, many other different things. Very, very interesting. It was a document sent by Polish president to Stalin, which is, I don't know if you can understand, we are in 1951, which means that there are a lot of problems in the international order in this moment. And these two guys, they are interested to discuss about the contribution of Poland in the Greek Civil War. So I thought that, of course, the document it's great, but it's not only about this document. I was thinking at this moment that, oh, now we are in a moment that we could start to see other kind of archives and archival materials than we tried to do until now, up to now. So I I tried to organize all my research, and of course we created a team with researchers knowing different languages. We had an important um, uh, financial support by different academic sources and European programs, and we started uh, to gather, to study all these documents in different countries, and of course in the ex-communist war in Eastern Europe and in Moscow. Of course, I speak to historians, you know, the problems with the archives and the documents, what is saved and what not, what is important, what not, what silences on different issues tell us, and etc., etc. All this kind of methodological questions that we, we, we have when we meet all this kind of documents. But the answer is that the last 20 years, the, um, the bulk, the amount of materials existed in all these countries um, is very, very helpful to not only to my book, but for, I don't know, there is material for hundreds of books on communism. And I think this is the why we are lucky, because as Greek communist history is so internationalized, the existence of all these archives in different countries assure that you can find materials about Cuba's history, which is not the case for other parties. And also, we should insist on the fact that Moscow, being the center of the communist movement internationally, um, um, received a huge amount of documents by all the communist parties in Europe, even for details, significant details on the communist party's history, local affairs without importance, etc., etc. So if you visit Moscow, unfortunately, for the time being it's impossible, but if you visit the archives in Moscow, you can find a lot of information and documents concerning not only the Greek party, but the communist party. Another issue, if I try to see your question, why I stopped in 56?
Other than the obvious, so this time.
Okay, I made a mistake. It was a miscalculation from my. And this is, as I've said, I studied communist studies, and I'm a child of the Cold War. And for me, as someone who knows communist history international, the international communist history, but as a person who has lived in the Cold War period, 1956, I mean, it's a question why I stopped in 1956 at the moment that the secret report of Khrushchev says that Stalin was a criminal and someone who distorted socialist. For me, it's the moment. It's the moment. But after the publication of the book, I saw some critics right and left, and I had some debates with people. Everyone asked, "When we finished in 1956?" I said, "Okay." So it was a mistake. It was wrong. It was wrong because I should think that for the majority of people who are not experts on communist history, or they are young people, and Cold War and communism means meaning almost nothing or very little, very few things. 1956 has not the same impact upon people as it has upon me, upon my way of thinking about communism. Because for me, 1956 in reality is the end of communism in the way that communism we thought it since the very beginning. For example, I give you an example. After 56, the communist system worldwide is fragmented. Absolutely. It's the moment that there is not only how can I say, a cleavage between the Yugoslavs and Stalin. It's not a small exception in the Balkans. After 56, we know the conflict between the Chinese and the Soviets. We know the Euro-communist movement and the reactions, the critics coming from what was called Euro-communism or national communism in Europe. Other trends in Latin America, Maoism, Trotskyism, May 68, and it's the first time we know this after 1968, after the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia. There is a widespread critical movement against Soviet Union coming from everywhere, from Euro-communists, but also from Albania, from Romania. So what we call the worldwide communist system after 1956, it was finished, it was ended. So I thought like this. At the beginning, but after so many people asked me, but why you finished in 1956? Why we didn't?
89, for instance, right?
Yeah,
Without
89.
Have been obvious.
I said that it was wrong. 1880 was very difficult because it would be a book of 1,000 pages and a totally different story. But for the Greek audience, I thought a lot that 68 or 74, 74 is the fall of the dictatorship, 68 is the split of the Communist Party. For many of the older generations, 68 is a very critical moment, a very critical uh, phase of the communist history. So I should go.
I think it's a choice.
Yeah.
It's not
It's a
right
choice,
or wrong.
but I was wrong. And finally, what the Communist Party said about my book. The Communist Party has a very compact, stable, coherent attitude about my work. Not only this, in general, I'm for the Communist Party. According to the Communist Party, I'm an agent of the Americans, capitalism, imperialism, other very, very dark forces, European Union. You should put that. It's easy. Other people who want the end of communism. So it's not a critic, but it's
Yeah.
it's something different.
John,
So I have two questions. The second one relates to the last point. The first one relates to something you started off with, which was about the role of refugee communists in the history of the KKE. And what I'm curious about. I mean, this is all fascinating stuff that you present. So thank you so much for your presentation, your book. But I was wondering about how was KKE's position on Macedonia in 1923? How was that received by refugees from Asia Minor? Like, how did that impact their the potential membership of the KKE, even in these regions that you were discussing in Drama and Volos and in the Gavala region, the tobacco-growing regions, where my family's from. Actually, there's I'll slide in another question too about the Civil War and the role of the KKE in organizing resistance after the Greek Army fled, and how Zacharias' letter from prison, what impact that had in recruiting people for KKE, even after maybe the position on Macedonia maybe repelled some people, especially in the north, from the KKE. And then finally, on the question that you started off with, which is the political science question of why did the KKE remain Stalinist? Maybe I missed something. I think that you said, well, in order to understand that, we need to study the history, and what I didn't hear so much in that discussion of that history was the role of cultural institutions. I just like this statement that you're an agent of the Americans, and so the idea that how does the KGB educate its own members and the family members, right? It's like within the family, because this is not this happens at a young age, right? They can continue support for KKE among younger generations. I was at a demonstration of May Day demonstration, Sintagma Square. I met Paparigo, and I was amazed at how many young people filled the square. And this is coming from Canada, where if there's a Labor Day celebration, there's old people. It's just all these old people going waving their flags. Why were there so many young people? It wasn't just what struck me. It's just the cultural dimension of this, the music, and everyone singing. And so the importance of these, what are the relative importance of these cultural institutions in sort of maintaining, reproducing a particular version of Stalinist communism, and insulating the membership from sinister outside forces like yourself.
Should we take a couple of more questions? Or? Yeah.
I would ask something. First of all, thank you very much for your presentation, your time. So you discuss in your book how Uruguay is it's not just a pawn of the Soviet Union, but I would like to hear more. And you outline this on your book, but I would like to hear more about the agency of the Uruguay leaders, and how can the agency, the aftermedia of the Uruguay leaders, and how can we describe their decisions within this framework of the um, central given policy, let's say, from the Soviet Union and Moscow? That's the question about the agency.
Okay. I think we should
Wait for John. Yeah. Can I ask our online audience if they have any questions? Yes, Panos. Yes.
Good morning, Professor. Welcome to Toronto. Now you're an agent of Canada.
Too many agencies.
So I'm sorry, I haven't read your book, but I have a question. The way I got your argumentation is that, looking especially after 91 and the 13th Congress, I got the impression that you describe as a Stalinist party at this moment, as opposed to a Marxist Leninist party, which Uruguay self-identifies as. So, how would you define a Stalinist party? Would you believe Uruguay today is a Stalinist party, or a Marxist Leninist party, or something else?
Thank you. Someone else? Do you want to answer in the reverse order? This one first, and next
Exactly.
one. John.
Exactly. Thank you for all the questions and your contribution to this debate. Very interesting questions and thoughts. Beginning with this last question. Actually, the Uruguay self-described as a Marxist-Leninist party. Marxist-Leninists are all the communist parties. This is not a differentiation, a characteristic that differentiate communist parties between them. All communist parties are Marxist-Leninist parties. The problem is, the issue is that after the 20th Congress of the Communist Party of Soviet Union, some of these Marxist-Leninist parties decided to take a distance from the Stalinist tradition. Many parties decided, for example, to follow Khrushchev in his path to denounce the Stalinist tradition, and continue to present themselves as Marxist-Leninists, being critical to the Stalinist period of the communist history. So the majority of the West European communist parties, like the Italian PC or the Scandinavian communist parties until the 90s, or the French party, or the Belgian party, or the Spanish party, all these parties were Marxist-Leninist parties. But they didn't were Stalinist because they denounced, they take an important distance between them and this legacy, this Stalinist legacy. There are few exceptions, and in Europe, And the most, I can say, prominent is the Greek one. The Communist Party in Greece not only um, uh, does not make any kind of serious critic about the Stalinist period, but it identified itself and it described this period as a heroic and important, um, how can I say, um, uh, a critical moment for the history of international communism, not only the communism of Soviet Union um, uh, history. So when I say that it's the last Stalinist party, I mean, of course, it's a Marxist-Leninist, as all the communist parties are. But the difference is the uh, perspective they have, the attitudes they have, the ideas they put, discuss and debating the Stalinist period in the Soviet Union. And when we talk about this period and we relate the KKK, the Communist Party of Greece, in this debate, we could see that Stalin is considered as a very important personality of their history. Um, another another question is this. We have a difficulty when we talk about, and this is very difficult to explain, to analyze how all these people who at the same time believe that the um, the global institutions like Communism, like Moscow Center, like Cominform, like that, um, uh, and their decisions, first of all, were obligatory to apply for all the communists. How these people could distance themselves from this decision and could have a kind of autonomy in relation to these decisions and to these institutions. It's a complicated issue and it's not easy. We should every time try to see the conjuncture, the moment, I mean, and of course all the political and social framework, and of course the geopolitical conjunctures. But in general, we have seen a lot of time that um, these people in the periphery, the communist periphery, tried and sometimes successfully to influence the decision making process in the center. I mean, they had strategies, they had interests, they had particular point of view in the periphery, and they were trying to impose this on the center. We have seen this in the Greek case during the 40s with the insist of the West leader to start a revolution insurgency in Greece, not to accept the Soviet logic of sphere of influence and compromise with the British. So the Greek communists, not only Zacharias, but an important amount of leaders and cadres in the Communist Party of Greece did not accept Stalin's logic of okay, sphere of influence, and Greece was considered to belong to the Western world. So they decided with different um, moves to, to, to push forward toward their logic. And we see that sometimes they could affect Stalin himself. And Stalin, talking about the Greek Civil War in the beginning, he was almost completely negative. There is, if you read Dimitrov's diaries, in January 1948, there is a meeting in Moscow with all the elite of the Bulgarian, Yugoslav, and Soviet Communist Party. I mean, Rostov, Zilas from Yugoslavia, etc. Different names, very important guys. And Stalin asked the Yugoslavs and the Bulgarians, "Do you believe that the Greeks could win? Do you believe that the Greeks could win in Greece in the Civil War?" And the Yugoslavs said, "Yes, of course, we believe." "I don't believe this," Stalin said. "I don't believe this. I don't have the same position, but I had the same idea about the Chinese Revolution, and I was wrong. And Mao was was right, and I was wrong. So maybe you're right, and maybe I'm wrong. It's very important because it's a moment we see Stalin having doubts. I don't believe that we could win, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. And this is, I'm absolutely persuaded that it is the influence, the impact of his comrade from Yugoslavia and Bulgaria. Yes, comrade Stalin. We could win. Zachariadis controlled the party, controlled their 50% of the Greek territory. It's an issue of time that the reactionaries will be defeated, etc., etc. In reality, of course, Stalin was right and the Balkans wrong. But at this moment, it's clear that what we can see is the role of the periphery and the capacity of the periphery to influence the center. And it's something very interesting. Of course, there's an hierarchy when Stalin understood that, okay, game over in Greece, story ended up with what we know, the end of the democratic government in Greece.
Shall we go to John's question?
Yeah, we're gonna
Maybe
have,
5 minutes. Yeah.
so the question about how refugees reacted to the decision of the Communist Party about Macedonia. We should say that in 1923, the Communist Party was a very small party, 4%, 5%. So when we talk about the reaction of its membership, we could say that, okay, we talk about a very small electoral basis. What we thought at the beginning, it was exactly what you said, that refugees coming from Asia Minor after the disaster and established in Greek Macedonia, they didn't want to live another refugee situation if Macedonia was out of the Greek borders. In reality, in the elections of 1926, we saw an important electoral rise of the Communist Party of Greece in the north and in northern Greece and the northern territories of the country. And the answer is to this phenomenon, why this happened. The answer is because for the electorate, the communist electorate, the social question, wages, unemployment, financial economic crisis, was more important than a theoretical issue about the creation of an autonomous independent Macedonian state, which at this time was thought something imaginary, a communist paradox, than something real. It's my opinion that we didn't see a very strong reaction. This is not an opinion, it's a fact. We didn't see a very strong reaction coming from the refugees in the ranks of the Communist Party of Greece against this decision. And finally, your question about cultural institutions and why so many young peoples are integrated to participate in the ranks of the Communist Party today. Yes, it's a good question. I don't have a clear answer. I mean, if you see now universities, for example, in Greece and the student movement, in reality, only the Communist Party, from all of the different leftist groups, trends, it is only the KKK which is activated in a very systematic, organized way, in everyday way. You can see the communist activists, the young members in the university discussing with other students, with their fellow students on issues, different issues, not only educational, but also political and ideological. It's an issue, it's a cultural issue, the answer is culture. It's something related with what you call cultural institutions. I don't know, I'm not sure. When you talk about songs, political songs and this collective memory of a heroic past, I thought the Spanish case, which is similar from one point of view. I mean, 45 years of dictatorship, very, very harsh dictatorship, and the memory of a civil war in the 30s. But on the other side, a very, very different Communist Party. I mean, Spanish one has a completely different history compared to the West. So I'm not sure if it is something related to what you call cultural. Maybe, I'm not sure. Or it is related to this different history, this particularity of the Communist Party, or the leadership for 30 years and thousands of people, of members of the party, were living in Soviet Union and Eastern countries, so they were educated with this very, very orthodox communist culture, which was not the case of the Spanish comrades, who had a very different story after the end of the Civil War in Spain. Sorry, I cannot answer. It's a very, very difficult question, but because everybody agree that Uruguay is a particularity even among communist parties, system of communist parties all over, at least the European continent.
A case of Greek exceptionalism in
Oh, I don't know. Yeah,
in some
maybe
ways.
in some way. Yeah.
Unfortunately, we have to stop because there's another. No, unfortunately, we have to stop because we have something else in this room. I want to thank Nikos and all of you and Professor Marantzidis and all of you, including the online audience. Before that, I just want to remind you that Professor Marantzidis will be speaking tomorrow at 2:30 at the Devonshire One place at the Monk School for Global Affairs, the University of Toronto, on something else, on the parties, on the left parties in Europe, from communism to the radical left, 1945, right? 2023
Yeah.
present. So a very different topic and approach. Is it the forthcoming book?
No.
Not yet.
No, not yet. Not yet. Yeah. It's a work that has some common points with this, but with it's a different comparative, of course, perspective. I try to see the development, the evolution of the communist parties in Europe since 1945, but I'm particularly interested what happened to these parties after 89. And there is a new phenomenon. We talk a lot, some of us at least, experts on communism, which is this new radical left. Syriza used to be a radical left party.
We'll find out more. I look forward to it. Thank you very much.